Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo has released the Judiciary's Annual Performance Report for the February 2020 to March 2021 period. Justice Zondo says while most targets were met, the Apex Court and the Land Courts in particular failed to finalise the agreed amount of cases. So with regards to transformation, he says not enough women have been appointed to the bench, with only about 44% of active judges being women. Let's reflect on some of the other aspects of that report. We're joined this morning by Advocate Thuli Madonsela, the chair of Stellenbosch University's Law Trust on Social Justice. Also joining the discussion is Mbekezeli Benjamin, a researcher at Judges Matter. To both of our guests, a very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us on this Wednesday morning. Mbekezeli, I want to begin with you this morning because there are so many incredibly important findings. Were there some in particular that stood out for you in terms of failings insofar as this report is concerned?
Good morning, Michelle. Good morning to Prof. Madonsela and to the viewers. Well, the report itself was surprising in terms of the performance, that the courts were able to perform so well, even despite the challenges of the pandemic and a lack of resources that we are all aware. But there were some concerning parts of the report, which primarily included the time period in which the finalized cases are calculated. The norms and standards for judicial performance say that a criminal case has to be concluded within 9 months and a civil case has to be concluded within 6 months. But the report itself doesn't really speak about those timelines, although they do show that the cases have been finalized at a very high rate.
So Advocate Thuli Madonsela, that's a huge case for concern, isn't it? The issue of the time it does take for the finalization of court cases.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Good morning to everyone and good morning to Advocate Mbekezeli. I do agree with Advocate Mbekezeli that case aging is an important part of case management, and therefore to just report on the percentage of cases that were disposed is great, but not enough. I would like to just also concur with my colleague that the report was heartwarming given the fact that all of this performance took place in the middle of COVID-19, and it is amazing that our courts were agile enough to leverage technology to continue to serve our people. And secondly, it was also amazing that the courts were also resilient in that even though COVID-19 seemed like it was going to go away within a short space of time, it continued for a long time and the courts have kept standing. I have two concerns, not about the courts, just about how we do monitoring. One is strategy comes from a war science, and in war science, strategy was about winning the war, which means 100%. But because we have fine-tuned our strategies to audit compliance, we're getting it wrong. So you will see, for example, some of the targets was they targeted 64%, or they targeted 80%, or they targeted 70%, and if they exceeded that, then, but still far below 100%, that was success. I think that has to end, and that was a battle I had with the audit team for years as a pub protector, because honestly, you've got to aim for 100%, and of course, if you miss, it's human, but to aim for less than 100% for me is confusing. And then the second part is the question of not just managing or measuring the percentage of cases you disposed. Also look at which cases did you dispose so that you really celebrate that the case aging is going down. Instead of the longest case, for example, being 3 years old, or the longest judgment to be delivered being 18 months, you then celebrate the fact that the time frame being used to finalize judgments is getting shorter, and the number of old cases is getting shorter.
Mbekezeli, can I bring you in on the issue of, and this has been a big issue, particularly in the news cycle, given so much reportage around the politicization on the appointment of judges. Were you surprised that the report, and I'm going to read a quote from Justice Zondo and what he had to say. He says, over the years, there have sometimes been people who have expressed views about a need for changes or reforms to be made in the way judges are appointed. And I've heard of late that there should be reforms. He says, at this stage, I would not call for any reforms in terms of the constitutional arrangements. What's your reaction to that, Mbekezeli?
Well, I think what Justice Zondo was speaking about was reforms that would, for example, change the Constitution and change the composition of the Judicial Service Commission. I think those reforms would still need to be debated. But there is a huge flaw in the process of appointing judges, which is a lack of any set of criteria by which to measure the people who qualify to be judges. So we sitting here don't really know what qualities does one need to be a judge and what qualities to be a judge of the Constitutional Court, for example. So that is a major flaw that can easily be remedied if the Judicial Service Commission were to sit in a one-day workshop and come up with those qualities and the criteria, and then I think that will improve the system significantly, because it will protect it from the politicization, and it will make sure that the commissioners are focused on the task of getting only the very best people to be judges in our courts.
In fact, Advocate Madonsela, it was just in October of this year that we had to, the JSC had to rerun those interviews for 2 Concourt vacancies. Those interviews that were held in 2021 had to be rerun again in October after CASAC challenged the submission of those shortlisted candidates. Were you hoping that more would have been said on the issues that Mbekezeli has just raised, particularly around, you know, what is the set of criteria that's needed for the appointment, particularly of Constitutional Court judges?
I must be honest that I hadn't expected the report, and therefore I didn't have any expectations. However, I agree, firstly, with the acting Chief Justice, that there's no need to change the Constitution. As you are saying, both of you, it's about changing human behavior. And Mbekezeli is suggesting that you need an open criteria. Firstly, that becomes a guardrail for those who are going to interview people. But it also becomes a standard against which we're going to judge the interviews and say, is it fair? Secondly, those who then make themselves available are not really strung along. And you go in there, you think you qualify, only to find that they're going to ask you questions that you didn't think were relevant. And therefore, I do think that a criteria is high time. And I've had conversations with the Minister of Justice where I think we should look to the UK. I don't always say we should look to the UK, but there are 2 areas of law that I like looking at the UK in. That is the Equality Act. So yes, we have Section 149, which is not relevant here. But it's relevant in terms of how do we diversify the judiciary in all its aspects. The second thing is about making sure that we have an open criteria for judges, and that criteria should also apply to acting judges. And in fact, I suggest that we shouldn't have acting judges, we should have part-time judges.
That's what you suggest, Advocate Madonsela?
Yes, because think about it, Michelle. If you're going through a divorce or your parent has been murdered, God forbid,
yes,
you don't want somebody who is a trial judge, somebody who's just doing their first case, to deal with that case. For you, it's a life and death matter. So you need somebody who's been sent through the same crucible of testing as any other judge, and you need somebody who's been given the same training as any other judge. Because these matters, for the average Gogodlamini, they don't have the ability to appeal. So the first judge will be the only judge that determines their fate.
Mbekezeli, your response?
Well, I think it's an interesting idea of having part-time judges. I think the current practice is not far from what Prof. Madonsela is suggesting. But I think one area that I would be concerned about is that is judicial independence. One of the key safeguards of judicial independence is that judges have secure tenure. So you are appointed as a judge, and you are appointed as a judge for life. And also that you are not allowed to take any other income outside of your judicial role. So those kinds of safeguards are important to ensure judicial independence, and an idea like that would have to make sure that it still incorporates a lot of those safeguards. But with that said, though, acting judges are a regular feature of our court system, and they've so far served us well, bar a few cases. But overall, we have a good quality acting judges, and they usually come from really senior lawyers who have tons of experience in practice.
Advocate Madonsela, the next big issue in our judiciary is, of course, the appointment of a new Chief Justice. So we're told by Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, Acting Chief Justice Zondo, that those four shortlisted judges, they'll be invited for public interviews scheduled to take place sometime at the beginning of February. That's going to be very interesting and something that you're looking forward to?
Well, I am looking forward to it, but because I was part of the selection committee or pre-selection committee, I wouldn't want to comment on that. But I must just say that it's a good thing that we're getting everyone tested. And I do disagree with my colleague around the acting judges. There's been really tough cases. And of course, the Gogo Dlamini cases are not everyone's concern, but there has been really mess ups by acting judges, and one of them is a GBV case recently, but I'm not even going to mention who it involved. And therefore, we should be looking at reform, and the old schemes that we are using to carry new wine are not serving us well.
Certainly a whole range of outstanding issues there, but a good time to get, Mbekezeli, a reflection from Acting Chief Justice Zondo on this, the state of our judiciary, a good update to get from him as we go into the new year.
Yes, it is encouraging, the update that he gave on the court performance, and I particularly liked how he emphasized the centrality of judges being sensitive to GBV, and that judges do have a role in combating and eliminating gender-based violence to ensure that women and girls in society are able to enjoy the freedoms, the dignity and the equality that the Constitution promises them. That's a very important point.
Absolutely. Let me thank both of our guests this morning. Thank you so much for your time on this Wednesday edition of the AM Report. Advocate Thuli Madonsela is the Stellenbosch University Law Trust chairperson, and Mbekezeli Benjamin is a researcher at Judges Matter. Thank you very much indeed.